My father looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's just cameras, Maya. You can always buy new ones." I had just discovered my $45,000 worth of professional photography equipment was gone, sold to pay for my sister's art therapy certification. This after I'd built their retirement fund and even constructed a photography studio in their backyard that was generating income for the family. So I made one phone call to my business lawyer, setting a plan in motion that they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The notification sound from my phone was oddly cheerful, considering what was about to unfold. I squinted at the screen from my editing desk, surrounded by wedding photos from the Morrison Chen wedding I'd shot the weekend before. The blue light from my calibrated monitor had been my constant companion for the past 6 hours as I worked through post-production, a process that required precision timing and the exact color accuracy that only professional equipment could provide. "Maya, can you swing by tomorrow around 2? Need to discuss some family business." The text was from my mother, Carol, and something about the formal tone made my stomach clench. Family business. In our household, that phrase usually meant Emma needed something expensive. I was Maya Chen, 31 years old, and I'd spent the last 8 years building what most people would consider a dream photography business. I specialized in high-end weddings, corporate events, and commercial shoots for local businesses. My client list included some of the city's most prominent families, and my wedding bookings were scheduled out 18 months in advance with a waiting list that grew longer every season. But success in professional photography isn't just about artistic vision or business skills. It's about equipment. Serious, expensive, professional equipment that most people see as just cameras, but represents the foundation of everything I'd built. My gear wasn't a hobby collection. It was a precisely calibrated arsenal of tools that had taken me 8 years to assemble. 2 Canon R5 camera bodies, each worth $3,900. A collection of L-series lenses that ranged from a 16-35mm f2.8 to a 7200mm f2.8, with a 50mm f1.2 and an 85mm f1.4 for portraits. Each lens represented months of saving and careful financial planning. My lighting setup included Profoto B10 strobes, softboxes, reflectors, and a complete backup system because equipment failure during a wedding wasn't just embarrassing, it was career-ending. The total value of my equipment was just over $45,000, but that number didn't capture the real cost. It didn't account for the years I'd worked second jobs to afford my first professional camera, the nights I'd researched every purchase, the careful way I'd built my kit piece by piece as my business grew and could justify each upgrade. My parents, Carol and Robert Chen, lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, a house they'd nearly lost 3 years ago when their adjustable-rate mortgage reset. I'd stepped in with a $75,000 down payment that allowed them to refinance and keep their home. It wasn't a gift, though they seemed to have forgotten that detail. I'd structured it as a formal loan with a promissory note, hoping to protect both of us with clear terms. In return for my financial help, they'd agreed to let me convert their oversized garage into a professional photography studio. I'd spent $15,000 of my own money on the renovation, professional electrical work for my lighting systems, soundproofing, a climate control system to protect equipment, and custom storage solutions. The studio had become the base of my operations, saving me thousands in monthly rental costs while providing my parents with additional income from other photographers who booked the space. It was a perfect arrangement, or so I'd thought. I paid them $800 monthly for studio access, and they collected additional rental income from other photographers who used the space when I wasn't shooting. The studio was booked solid most weekends, generating between $800 and $2,400 in additional monthly income for my parents' retirement fund. But there was always Emma. My sister Emma, 29, was what charitable people might call a free spirit, and what realistic people would call a professional student with no follow-through. In the 8 years I'd been building my photography business, Emma had pursued culinary school, dropped out after 1 semester, yoga instructor certification, completed but never taught a single class, life coaching certification. The clients lasted about 3 months. Holistic nutrition counseling, stopped when she realized she'd have to take chemistry, and most recently, a $12,000 photography course that she'd completed but never used. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on me. While I'd been grinding through years of building a real photography business, Emma had spent 4 months taking Instagram-style portrait classes and declared herself too artistic for commercial work. Each of Emma's educational adventures followed the same pattern: explosive enthusiasm, expensive enrollment, family fanfare about Emma finally finding her path, followed by quiet abandonment and the search for the next calling. The financial pattern was equally predictable: student loans, credit card debt, and strategic emotional manipulation of our parents when the bills came due. What made it worse was how my parents enabled her. Every time I'd achieved a business milestone, landing a major commercial client, booking my first $5,000 wedding, expanding my services, the celebration would be brief before conversation turned to Emma's struggles and needs. My success was treated as evidence that I didn't need support, while Emma's failures were treated as proof that she needed more help. I drove to their house the next afternoon with a strange sense of foreboding. My mother's text had been uncharacteristically formal, and something about the timing felt ominous. I just booked 3 major weddings for the following spring, including one that would be featured in a national magazine. Business was booming, which historically meant my family would find new ways to need financial assistance. The house looked the same as always: well-maintained landscaping, fresh paint, the overall appearance of comfortable suburban success. My car looked modest in their driveway, a practical Honda that I'd bought used, because every dollar I didn't spend on personal luxuries was a dollar I could invest in equipment or business growth. "Maya, sweetie." My mother greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was dressed casually but carefully, the way she dressed for difficult conversations. Come in. Your father's in the kitchen." I followed her inside, noting that the house felt different somehow. There was an underlying tension, like the air before a storm. Family photos lined the hallway: my college graduation, Emma's various certification ceremonies, family vacations funded by my business success. My father, Robert, was sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and what looked like financial documents spread across the granite countertop. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his expression: guilt. "Hi, Dad," I said, taking a seat across from him. "Mom said you wanted to discuss family business." He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Maya, we need to talk about the studio arrangement." My blood pressure immediately spiked. "What about it?" "Well," my mother said, settling beside my father, "Emma's been accepted into this wonderful program. Art therapy certification through the Downtown Institute. It's a very prestigious program, and she's so excited about it." I waited for the other shoe to drop, knowing it would fall hard. "The program costs $28,000, my father continued, "and it starts in 6 weeks. Emma's already maxed out her student loans, and with her credit card situation." They didn't need to finish the sentence. I'd been hearing versions of this conversation for years. Emma needs money. Emma found her calling. Emma can't access traditional funding. Therefore, Maya should help. "What does this have to do with my studio?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand exactly what it had to do with my studio. My mother's smile became more forced. "Well, we've been thinking about restructuring the garage space. There's this lovely couple, Janet and Rick, who want to rent it long-term for pottery classes. They're offering $2,200 per month, guaranteed for 2 years. The math was simple. My current arrangement brought them about $1,600 monthly between my rent and other bookings. The pottery couple was offering $2,200 monthly, providing the additional $600 monthly they'd need to help fund Emma's program. "Where would I work?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled. "Oh, Maya, you're doing so well now," my father said, his tone patronizing in a way that made my jaw clench. "You can afford to rent a proper downtown studio. This is actually an opportunity for you to upgrade your professional image." There it was, the casual dismissal of everything I'd built, the assumption that my carefully constructed business setup was somehow temporary or expendable, the suggestion that I should be grateful for the opportunity to spend $3,000, $4,000 monthly on commercial studio rental so they could fund Emma's latest educational experiment. "This studio isn't just convenient for me," I said slowly. It's integral to my business model. I've invested thousands in the setup, and I have bookings scheduled here through the end of the year. Maya, please don't make this more complicated than it needs to be, my mother said with a sigh. Emma finally found something she's passionate about, something that could really help people. Art therapy is a growing field. So was photography, 8 years ago when I started my business, I replied. But no one offered to restructure their life to help me succeed. My parents exchanged a look that I'd seen countless times. The look that said Maya was being unreasonable. Maya was being selfish. Maya should understand that Emma needed more help. That's different, Maya, my father said. You've always been self-sufficient. Emma needs more support to reach her potential. Self-sufficient. As if my success had been inevitable, rather than the result of years of work, sacrifice, and careful planning. As if the $75,000 loan that had saved their house was just a casual favor between equals, rather than a significant financial commitment that had delayed my own homeownership plans. I need to think about this, I said, standing up from the kitchen island. Of course, dear, my mother said, walking me toward the door. But don't think too long. Emma needs to submit her final enrollment paperwork by Friday, and she needs to pay the deposit to hold her spot. Friday. They wanted me to dismantle my entire professional setup in less than a week, so Emma could chase another expensive dream that would likely end the same way as all the others. I drove home in a state of disbelief that gradually crystallized into anger. Not just anger at the immediate situation, but at the years of accumulated disrespect for my work, my investments, and my planning. Every time I'd prioritized my business over family social events, I'd been made to feel guilty. Every time I'd declined to fund Emma's adventures, I'd been made to feel selfish. But now, when they wanted to disrupt the foundation of my business, I was supposed to be understanding and flexible. That evening, I called my best friend and unofficial business advisor, Zoe Martinez. Zoe had built her own marketing consultancy from scratch and understood the realities of entrepreneurship in a way my family never had. They want to kick you out of your studio for Emma? She said after I'd explained the situation. Maya, that's insane. They think I can just rent commercial space downtown and continue as usual, I said, pacing my apartment. They have no idea what commercial studio rental costs, or how relocating would disrupt my client relationships. Do you have a lease agreement for the studio space? I stopped pacing. No, it's always been informal. We had a verbal agreement about the rent and usage terms, but nothing in writing. Maya, you need legal protection here. This isn't just about the studio, it's about your entire business foundation. She was right, but I decided to try one more approach before involving lawyers. I spent the evening drafting a formal lease agreement that would protect my studio access while still allowing my parents to benefit from the rental income. I included reasonable terms for both parties, a clause giving me first right of refusal if they wanted to change the arrangement, and provisions for the equipment storage and electrical upgrades I'd installed. I drove back to their house on Thursday morning, lease agreement in hand, hoping to find a solution that worked for everyone. Both my parents were home, and Emma was there too, sitting at the kitchen table with what looked like program materials spread around her. She looked up when I walked in, her expression immediately defensive. "Hi, Maya," she said coolly. "Mom told me you're being difficult about the studio space." I ignored her and placed the lease agreement on the table in front of my parents. I've drafted something that I think will work for everyone. It formalizes our current arrangement and protects all parties involved. My mother picked up the papers, her expression souring as she read. "Maya, this seems unnecessarily complicated. We're family. We shouldn't need contracts and legal language. That's exactly why we need it in writing," I said firmly, "to protect our relationship and prevent misunderstandings." My father cleared his throat. "The thing is, Maya, we've already given our word to Janet and Rick. They're planning to start their pottery setup next month." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "You already committed my studio space to someone else?" "It's not your studio space, Maya," Emma said, her voice sharp. "It's Mom and Dad's garage. They've been incredibly generous letting you use it, but they have the right to make decisions about their own property." "Emma, you don't understand the situation here," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I understand that you're being selfish," she shot back. Mom and Dad need the extra income for my program, and you're trying to prevent that because it's convenient for you. I looked at my sister, this person I'd grown up with, who had just reduced years of my business planning and investment to convenient for me. Emma, I've invested $15,000 in renovating that space. I store $45,000 worth of equipment there. I have clients booked through December who expect to use that studio. So store your cameras somewhere else and rent a different space, she said with a shrug. You make good money. You can afford it. Cameras. Just like my father had said, just cameras. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Maya, we understand this is an adjustment for you, but we have other financial obligations now. Emma's program is time-sensitive, and my business isn't? Maya, please, my mother said, her tone taking on the long-suffering quality I remembered from childhood arguments. Emma's been struggling to find her path. This program could really change her life. You've already been so successful. Surely you can make this work. I looked around the kitchen table at these three people. My parents who had raised me to be responsible and hardworking, and my sister who had been raised to believe that other people should solve her problems. The same parents who had celebrated when I'd paid off their mortgage were now treating my business as expendable compared to Emma's dreams. When do Janet and Rick want to start? I asked quietly. Next Monday, Emma said triumphantly. They're bringing their pottery wheels this weekend. 6 days. They'd given me 6 days' notice to relocate 8 years' worth of business infrastructure. I see, I said, standing up and taking back the unsigned lease agreement. Well, I guess I need to start making calls about moving my equipment. Maya, we knew you'd understand, my mother said, relief evident in her voice. You're so practical about these things. I left their house in a fog of betrayal that gradually hardened into cold determination. They wanted practical. They were about to discover exactly how practical I could be. That afternoon, I made several phone calls. The first was to Morrison's Camera Exchange, a high-end photography equipment dealer downtown. I needed to get insurance appraisals updated on all my gear, and I wanted to document the current value of everything stored in the studio. The second call was to David Martinez, my business attorney. I'd used David's services when incorporating my photography business and setting up client contracts. Now I needed him for a different kind of legal protection. David, I need you to review some documents for me, I said. Specifically, the promissory note from my parents' mortgage assistance and anything related to the studio rental arrangement. What's going on, Maya? My family is about to learn the difference between a favor and a business agreement. While I waited for David to review my documents, I drove to the studio to begin cataloging my equipment. I needed detailed records of everything stored there, from the obvious pieces like camera bodies and lenses to smaller items like memory cards, battery packs, and lighting accessories. The studio looked exactly as I'd left it after my last shoot, professional, organized, and expensive. The lighting setup alone represented $12,000 in Profoto equipment. The backdrop system, seamless paper rolls, and posing furniture added another $3,000. My equipment storage system, with its climate-controlled cabinets and security locks, had cost $2,500 to install. But as I stood there taking inventory, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Several items were missing from their usual places. My backup Canon R6, which I always kept in the locked storage cabinet, wasn't there. Neither was my 24-70mm f2.8 lens, my portable lighting kit, or my laptop bag with editing software and client files. I immediately called my parents. Dad, I'm at the studio and some of my equipment is missing. Did you move anything? Oh, well, Maya. We had Janet and Rick come by yesterday to look at the space. They needed to measure for their pottery wheels, and we moved a few things to give them room to work. Where did you move my equipment? It's safe, don't worry. We put everything in boxes in the basement. The basement. My climate-controlled, security-locked equipment was sitting in boxes in their basement, where humidity and temperature fluctuations could damage electronic components and lens coatings. Dad, that equipment needs to be stored in controlled conditions. I'm coming over right now. Maya, relax. It's just for a few days until you figure out your new storage situation. When I arrived at their house 20 minutes later, I found my parents and Emma in the backyard with two people I didn't recognize, presumably Janet and Rick. the pottery couple who would be taking over my studio. "Maya!" Emma called out cheerfully when she saw me. "Perfect timing. Mom and Dad wanted you to meet Janet and Rick." I ignored the introductions and headed straight for the basement. What I found there made me physically sick. My equipment wasn't just safely stored in boxes. It had been carelessly shoved into old moving boxes and storage containers, with no padding or protection. Lenses were loose in boxes with other items. Delicate electronic components were stacked haphazardly. My laptop bag had been opened, and files were scattered. But worse than the storage conditions was what was missing. My primary camera body, the Canon R5 I used for all my wedding work, was nowhere to be found. Neither was my 85mm f1.4 portrait lens or my main Profoto strobe. I ran back upstairs to find my parents still talking with Janet and Rick about pottery kiln placement. "Where's my R5?" I demanded, interrupting their conversation. "Your what?" my father asked, looking confused. "My main camera body, the Canon R5. It's not in the basement with the other equipment." My parents exchanged a look that I'd seen before, the look that preceded bad news. "Maya, sweetheart, we can talk about this inside," my mother said, glancing nervously at Janet and Rick. "We can talk about it right here. Where is my camera?" Emma stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Maya, we needed to make some quick decisions about storage and practicality. Some of your equipment was redundant, and with storage costs and the space limitations—" "Emma, where is my camera?" "We sold it," she said, her tone matter of fact. "Along with some of the other pieces, but in a good way. We got excellent prices, and the money is going directly toward my tuition. It's like an investment in the family's future." The world tilted. I gripped the patio railing to steady myself. "You sold my equipment?" "Maya, please don't be dramatic," my mother said quickly, glancing again at the pottery couple who were looking increasingly uncomfortable. "It was just the redundant pieces. You have backup cameras." "That wasn't a backup camera. That was my primary working camera. And even if it were backup equipment, you had no right to sell my property." "Maya, please calm down," my father said. "You're making a scene. We can discuss this privately." Janet cleared her throat. "Maybe we should come back another time." No, my mother said quickly. "Maya understands that this is just business. Maya, you understand, right?" I looked around at the 5 people standing on the patio. My parents, my sister, and 2 strangers who would soon be operating pottery classes in the studio I'd built with my own money, using equipment they thought I wouldn't miss. "Which equipment did you sell?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like a list. The Canon R5, the 85mm lens, the big light with the umbrella thing, and some of the smaller lenses. "Oh, and the laptop. My editing laptop?" "Well, yeah, but Maya, you have other computers." And the photography software was just taking up space on the hard drive. My editing laptop, with client files, workflow presets, and 3 years of archived work. With editing software that cost thousands of dollars and took months to properly configure. "When did you sell this equipment?" "Tuesday," Emma said proudly. "I found this amazing camera shop that specializes in professional gear, Morrison's Camera Exchange. They gave us fantastic prices for everything. I was so proud of myself for negotiating such a good deal." Morrison's, the same shop I'd called about insurance appraisals. They'd bought my stolen equipment from my own family. "How much did you get?" I asked. $38,000, Emma said triumphantly. "Can you believe it? I had no idea cameras were worth so much. $38,000 for equipment that was worth over $45,000 new and was essential to my business operations. They'd sold my livelihood for spending money. "Maya, this is actually a blessing in disguise," my father said, apparently interpreting my stunned silence as acceptance. "Now you'll be forced to upgrade to the latest models. Think of it as a forced equipment refresh." I pulled out my phone and called Morrison's. "Morrison's Camera Exchange, this is Linda." "Hi, this is Maya Chen. I believe someone sold you some Canon equipment on Tuesday. R5 body, 85mm lens, Profoto lights. I need to speak with your manager about ownership documentation." I watched my family's faces change as they began to understand what I was doing. "Ma'am, we'd be happy to discuss this with you, but we need you to come in with proof of ownership and identification. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, hanging up. Maya, what are you doing? My father asked, alarm creeping into his voice. I'm filing a police report for theft, I said calmly. $38,000 worth of theft. You can't do that, Emma gasped. We're family. Family doesn't sell each other's property without permission, Emma. My mother stepped forward, her face flushing with anger. Maya Elizabeth Chen, you will not embarrass this family by involving the police in a simple misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Mom. This is theft. You sold my equipment without my knowledge or consent to fund Emma's education. It's not theft when it's family, my father said desperately. We were helping each other out. We'll pay you back. With what money? You just spent $38,000 on Emma's tuition. Janet and Rick were backing toward their car, clearly wanting no part of this family drama. We should go, Janet said quietly. This obviously isn't a good time. No, wait, Emma called after them. This is just Maya being dramatic. The studio space will be available on schedule. I turned to Emma, this person who had just sold my livelihood and was still trying to protect her pottery studio deal. Emma, by tomorrow morning, you're going to understand the concept of consequences. I left them standing in the backyard and drove straight to Morrison's Camera Exchange. Linda, the shop manager, was a woman in her 50s who'd clearly dealt with situations like this before. She reviewed my insurance documentation, purchase receipts, and serial number records with professional sympathy. This is unfortunately more common than you'd think, she said. Family members selling equipment without permission. The good news is that we haven't processed the final sale yet. We always hold professional-grade equipment for a week to verify ownership in exactly these situations. Relief flooded through me. So you still have everything? We do. But there's a complication. The people who brought it in have already collected payment. We paid them $38,000 in cash, as requested. Even if I could get my equipment back, Emma had already spent the money. However, Linda continued, we're willing to work with you. You can reclaim your equipment by paying us the $38,000, and then you can pursue legal action against the sellers for reimbursement. I didn't have $38,000 in liquid cash. My business account had about $12,000, and the rest of my savings was tied up in investments and my apartment down payment fund. But I had something else. I had the promissory note from my parents' mortgage assistants and 8 years of documentation showing how that loan had been structured. I called David Martinez from the parking lot outside Morrison's. David, what did you find in the promissory note review? Maya, this is actually interesting. When you helped your parents with their mortgage, you didn't just give them money. You structured it as a secured loan with the property as collateral. I'd forgotten that detail. I'd been trying to be smart about tax implications and protect both parties with clear terms. The note includes acceleration clauses, David continued. If they materially alter the property or use it for commercial purposes without your written consent, the full loan amount becomes due immediately. The photography studio qualifies as commercial use. Definitely. And they've certainly materially altered the property without your consent by removing your equipment and changing the usage terms. I sat in my car, looking at the phone number for Morrison's Camera Exchange. My parents had just triggered a clause that made their entire $75,000 loan to me immediately payable. David, if they can't pay the loan immediately, what are my options? As the lien holder, you could force a sale of the property to recover your funds. You'd have first position, meaning you'd be paid before any other creditors. My parents thought they held all the cards because it was their house, and I was just their daughter who should be grateful for their generosity. They'd forgotten that I wasn't just their daughter. I was their creditor, and they'd just violated the terms of their loan agreement. David, I need you to prepare acceleration paperwork. I want the full loan amount called in immediately. Maya, that's a nuclear option. Are you sure you want to go that route? I thought about my equipment sitting in Morrison's, about Emma spending $38,000 of money that wasn't hers, about my parents treating my business as expendable compared to Emma's dreams. I'm sure. Also, I need you to research criminal charges for theft and fraud. They sold $45,000 of my equipment without permission. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning. That evening, I called a family meeting. My own family meeting, on my terms. I need all 3 of you at the house tomorrow at 2 p.m., I told my mother over the phone. Maya, honey, we can work this out, she said immediately. Emma's looking into payment plan options for her tuition. Maybe she can return some of the money. 2 p.m. tomorrow. Be there. I arrived at their house the next day with David Martinez and a briefcase full of documents. Emma's car was in the driveway along with my parents' cars, and I could see them watching from the kitchen window as we approached the front door. They were all sitting at the kitchen table when David and I walked in, looking like they were facing a firing squad. Maya, my father started, we want to apologize. I'm not interested in apologies, I said, taking a seat across from them. I'm here to discuss the legal situation you've created. David placed several document sets on the table with professional precision. I'm David Martinez, Maya's attorney, he said formally. We're here to address multiple legal violations that occurred this week. Emma looked confused. My parents looked terrified. First, David continued, the matter of stolen property. Maya has comprehensive documentation proving ownership of $45,000 worth of photography equipment that was sold without her knowledge or consent. This constitutes theft in the first degree and fraud. We didn't know it was theft, my mother protested weakly. We thought ignorance of the law isn't a legal defense, David said calmly. Selling someone else's property without permission is theft regardless of family relationships. Second, he continued, placing another document on the table, the matter of the promissory note. Maya provided a $75,000 loan for your mortgage refinancing in 2021, with specific terms outlined in this agreement. My father picked up the document with shaking hands, his face going pale as he read. You've violated multiple clauses of this agreement, David explained. Commercial use without written consent, material alteration of the property without permission, and interference with the lender's business operations. Under the acceleration clause, the full loan amount is now due immediately. Immediately? My mother whispered. Within 30 days, as specified in the original agreement. We don't have $75,000, my father said, his voice barely audible. Which brings us to the third issue, David said, placing the final document on the table. In the event that the loan cannot be repaid, Maya has the legal right to force a sale of the property to recover her funds. As the primary line holder, she would be paid before any other creditors. The silence in the room was absolute. Emma stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. What does this mean? She asked, her voice small and scared. It means, I said, looking directly at my sister, that you've just bet your parents' house on my equipment being worthless, and you lost. My mother started crying quietly. My father just sat there, staring at the promissory note he'd signed 3 years ago, probably never imagining that his responsible daughter would ever use it against him. Maya, he said finally, what do you want from us? I want my equipment back. I want compensation for the business losses you've caused, and I want you to understand that your actions have real consequences. We can't afford to buy back your equipment, Emma said, panic obvious in her voice. I already paid my tuition deposit. The money's gone. That's not my problem, Emma. You spent money that wasn't yours. David cleared his throat. Maya is prepared to offer an alternative to forced property sale and criminal prosecution. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where my studio used to be functional and profitable. Here are your options, I said, my back still turned to them. Option 1, pay me $75,000 for the loan, plus $45,000 for my stolen equipment, plus $20,000 for business losses and legal fees. Total of $140,000. Due in 30 days. I heard Emma make a choking sound. Option 2, I file criminal charges for theft, pursue civil damages, and force the sale of this house. You lose everything, your credit is destroyed, and Emma likely faces criminal prosecution for fraud. I turned around to face them. Option 3, sign ownership of this property over to me immediately. You can remain here as tenants paying market rate rent. Emma gets a real job and pays back the $38,000 over time with interest, and all of you learn to respect other people's property. My mother looked up from her tears. You'd make us renters in our own home? It stopped being your home the moment you decided to steal from me to pay Emma's bills, I said without emotion. You made your choice. Now you live with the consequences. Emma stood up suddenly, her face red with anger. This is insane, Maya. You're destroying our family over some cameras and lights. I walked over to my sister and looked her directly in the eyes. Those cameras and lights represent 8 years of my career, Emma. 8 years of 12-hour workdays, of missing family events to build my business, of saving every dollar to buy professional equipment. You destroyed that in one afternoon to pay for another one of your educational experiments that you'll probably quit in 6 months. I didn't know, she started. You didn't know because you never asked. You've spent your entire adult life assuming that other people exist to solve your problems. You've never asked me about my business, my expenses, or my plans. You just assumed that because I'm successful, my things don't matter. I turned back to my parents. You raised me to be responsible, to work hard, and to plan for the future. Then you punished me for succeeding by treating my success as your personal ATM. My father finally found his voice. Maya, we made a terrible mistake. We see that now. But destroying our family won't fix what we did. I'm not destroying the family, Dad. I'm protecting myself from family members who were willing to destroy my livelihood without a second thought. David placed a pen on the table next to the property transfer documents. You have 24 hours to decide, I said. After that, I file criminal charges and force the sale. I headed toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. By the way, Emma, I called the Downtown Institute. They have a very generous refund policy for students who withdraw before classes begin. You might want to look into that while you still have time to get your money back. I left them sitting around their kitchen table, staring at the documents that would determine whether they had a roof over their heads next month. 24 hours later, David called with the news I'd expected. They signed the property transfer, Maya. The house is yours. The next phase moved quickly. I became the legal owner of the house where I'd grown up, with my parents as month-to-month tenants paying $2,800 monthly rent, market rate for a 4-bedroom colonial in their neighborhood. Emma had no choice but to withdraw from her art therapy program and get her first real job in years, customer service for a medical billing company. She signed an agreement to repay the $38,000 over 5 years at 6% interest, with her first payment due in 30 days. I used the property as collateral to secure a business loan, reclaimed my equipment from Morrison's, and found a better studio space in a professional complex downtown. The new location actually impressed clients more than the converted garage had, and my bookings increased. But the most significant change was personal. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't managing anyone else's finances, emotions, or dreams. I wasn't the responsible daughter who fixed everyone's problems, while having my own needs dismissed as selfish. My parents' transformation was remarkable. Without their financial safety net, they became incredibly budget-conscious. My mother got a part-time job at a local art supply store. My father started doing handyman work for neighbors. They paid their rent on time every month, and suddenly became very respectful of my property and my time. Emma, faced with actual consequences for the first time in her adult life, began developing real work skills and financial responsibility. No more expensive courses, no more family-funded self-discovery, no more credit card bailouts. She was finally learning what the rest of us had known all along, that money has to be earned before it can be spent. 6 months after the confrontation, my phone rang while I was editing photos in my new downtown studio. It was my mother. Maya, she said, and I could hear something different in her voice. Humility. Genuine remorse. I know we don't have the right to ask anything from you after what we did. But your father's birthday is next week, and we were wondering if you'd like to come for dinner. I thought about it for a moment. The anger had faded, replaced by something more sustainable. Boundaries. I'll bring dessert, I said. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something more practical and more honest. A relationship based on mutual respect, rather than financial dependency and unspoken obligations. When I arrived at the house, my house, for dinner the following week, Emma was there too. She looked tired, but more grounded than I'd ever seen her. The constant anxiety of financial instability had been replaced by the calm that comes from earning your own way. Maya, she said quietly as I was leaving that night, I want you to know I understand now. Not just about the legal stuff, but about what you built. I never respected what you'd accomplished. and I'm sorry for that. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone who was finally growing up. Emma, I hope this job works out for you. And I mean that. She smiled, a real smile for the first time in months. Me too. It's hard work, but it's mine. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd finally forced us to become one. A real family based on respect, responsibility, and genuine care, rather than enabling, entitlement, and financial manipulation. My equipment was back. My business was thriving, and my family was finally functional. Sometimes the best way to save something is to be willing to lose it. The consequences for them were severe, but the peace it brought me was priceless. I had my vindication, my equipment, and most importantly, my life back. And they had learned something too. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And when you violate someone's trust, especially someone who's been supporting you, you don't get to act surprised when they stop supporting you. The photography equipment they'd dismissed as just cameras had cost them their house, their financial security, and their comfortable retirement. But in the end, it had given us all something more valuable: honesty. Sometimes that's what it takes to build a real relationship. Losing everything you thought you were entitled to and starting over with what you've actually earned.